So I wanted to do a read-along of Thomas Carlyle's French Revolution. Now, obviously, it's a book some 750 pages long before you get into explanatory notes and annotations. So I think a full reading simply doesn't cut it. It would probably go on for too long and be too time consuming. So instead, what I'm going to do is sort of read along, get you through the framework of it, and I'm going to call out certain passages as they come pop out of the page at me, so to speak. And hopefully people can enjoy that, because there does seem to be some decent headway for all things Carlyle. And I think his French Revolution is probably his greatest work. It certainly is his largest work and his largest endeavor. So I think there should be something of it online for people to enjoy. So we'll start with his layout. There's 3 volumes to it. Volume 1 is The Bastille, and it has in it 7 books. And then Volume 2 goes to the Constitution, which opens on the Feast of the Pikes near the Tuileries. And then, it goes on for 6 books, with the final book of Volume 2 being the Marseillaise, culminating in the Constitution being burst into pieces, so to speak, the failure of any sensible revolution. And then Volume 3 is The Guillotine, which is the descent into the terror. And then he does briefly touch upon Thermidor in the last few of his books. There are 7 books in Volume 3. So I think I'll do a book per reading. Now, it won't be an entire book. Each book contains numerous chapters. It won't be an entire reading, as I said, word for word, but I will try and take out the flavour of it and the feeling of it. So book 1 is, of volume 1, is the death of Louis XV. And he opens with the death of Louis XV, whose life was from 15th February 1710 to the 10th of May 1774, and whose reign was pretty much for most of that life. It was from the 1st of September 1715. Of course, he succeeded a great-grandfather in Louis XIV at merely the age of 5. So, despite being young when he inherited the throne, it was a quite long reign. So, what Carlyle's getting at is he's getting at the year 1774, which is going to be the death of Louis XV, as the first marking of destabilization in France. And he opens with Chapter 1, Louis the Well-Beloved, which was, of course, his moniker, that he was a well-beloved king. And in retrospect, when we know that France is going to descend into the terror, this is quite an apt, or it's almost the sense of tragedy to it when you open up with the death of the beloved king. Certainly foreboding is there, and I think that's why Carlyle chose it. And he starts his opening paragraph by reminding people that in the summer of 1744, 30 years before his death, Louis became quite ill, traveling near the Alsace region, but he recovered. But now we're 30 years on, and this time the recovery is not going to occur. So Carlyle, blasts in with, "So stands it written, in lasting memorial of that year 1744, the year in which Louis did recover. 30 other years have come and gone, and this great prince again lies sick. But in how altered circumstances now, church resound not with excessive groans. Paris is stoically calm." So, obviously, if in 1744 there was a panic, but now it's more like the natural life cycle of Louis XV has expired. "So fortune ever accounted inconstant, and each dog has but his day," says Carlyle. Each dog has but his day. An interesting line, which originally came from Hamlet, and Carlyle's quite fond of quoting Shakespeare and the Bible through this passage as well, through this work, as we'll see. So, Louis is going to expire, and there's going to be a power vacuum. And here comes Carlyle in his pure, unfiltered method. From the rest of France there comes, as we said, no prayer, or one of an opposite character expressed openly in the streets, chateau or hotel, where an enlightened philosophism scrutinizes many things, is not given to prayer, neither are Rossbach victories, terre finances, nor, say, only 60,000 lettres de cachet, which is Maupeou's share, persuasives towards that. Oh, no, prayers? From a France smitten by black art with plague after plague, and lying now in shame and pain with a harlot's foot on its neck, what prayer can come? Plague after plague is a reference to Exodus, harlot's foot on the neck being a reference to Joshua. So you can see here he really is portending, he is genuinely making this biblical in scale. Grind for done at the wheel of labour. This is what has happened to France. And so really we enter then chapter 2, realised ideals. Such a changed France have we, and a changed Louis. This is the epochs between 1744 and 1774. To the eye of history, many things in that sick room of Louis are now visible, which to his courtiers there present were invisible. For indeed, it is well said, in every object there is inexhaustible meaning. The eye sees in it what the eye brings mean of seeing. And he mentions certain episodes which would have occurred. So it was, we say, in those conquests of Flanders 30 years ago, but so it no longer is. The conquests have ceased. Alas, much more lies sick than poor Louis, not the French king only, but the French kingship. The world is all so changed, so much that seemed vigorous is sunk decrepit, so much that was not is beginning to be. Boston Harbor is black with unexpected tea. Behold, a Pennsylvanian Congress gather, and ere long on Bunker Hill democracy announcing, and rifle volleys death-winged under her star banner to the tune of Yankee Doodle Doo. That she is born, and whirlwind-like will envelop the whole world. We can see here traces of Carlyle's thought on the American Revolution, but what he's saying is quite important. That Louis XV's death in 1774 coincides perfectly with the American Revolution, and that perhaps the ideas of that revolution would not have filtered through to France so easily and so readily had France been experiencing the mid-reign of quite a stable monarch, but that is of course not the case. Charlemagne sleeps at Salzburg, says Carlyle, with truncheon grounded, only fable expecting that he will awaken. This idea that some sovereign of sovereigns will take France out of the malady, this is again Carlyle talking about his great man theory, that the time calls people forth, he poo-poos this idea, because here's an example of a time calling someone forth, and they do not appear. So the time does not call forth the great man. So the germ, instead, is that of democracy, and it's that of the American Revolution, or at least its ideals as reinterpreted in France. And here is Carlyle again. How such ideals do realize themselves and grow wondrously from amid the incongruous, ever-fluctuating chaos of the actual. This is what world history, if it teach anything, has to teach us. How they grow, and after long stormy growth, bloom out, mature, supreme, then quickly, for the blossom is brief, fall into decay. Sorrowfully dwindle and crumble down, or rush down noisily or noiselessly, disappearing. The blossom is so brief. You can see there a mini Spenglerian cycle. The blossom of French royalty, cactus-like, has accordingly made an astonishing progress. In those Metz days, this is the days of Louis XV's original recovery, 1744, it was still standing with all its petals, though bedimmed by Orleans regents and Rouen ministers and cardinals. But now, in 1774, we behold it bald. and the virtue nigh gone out of it. So you can see here his Carlyle great sense of narrative. This is very unlike something Gibbon would say. Gibbon would be doing because A, therefore B, and so C occurred. Very formulaic, very much according to a template. But here it's pure narrative. The blossom of French royalty, cactus-like, associating the blossom and the decay of French royalty. Who is it that king, able man, named so Roi, Rex, or director now guides? His own huntsman prickers, when there is to be no hunt. It is well said, Le roi ne fera rien. Today his majesty will do nothing. Close view to their industry and functions is that of the dressing gracefully and eating sumptuously. As for their debauchery and depravity, it is perhaps unexampled since the era of Tiberius and Commodus. And here we see that although he's unlike Gibbon in style, he is still highly influenced by Gibbon's Decline and Fall, and he's trying to associate that Decline and Fall of French kings with that of Rome, Tiberius, Commodus, emperors of excess, emperors of self-indulgence. Such is the royalty in France. And then he closes out chapter 2 by juxtaposing that against the outside. Everywhere want, dishonesty, unbelief. Lord Chesterfield, summing up what he had noted of this same France, wrote and sent off by post the following words that have become memorable. And here he quotes Lord Chesterfield. In short, all the symptoms which I have ever met with in history previous to great changes and revolutions in government now exist and daily increase in France. This, of course, this dates much further back to Chesterfield's letters dated December 25th, 1753, so in the middle of a 7 Years' War. But Carlyle calls them now, in 1774, more truthful than ever. Chapter 3 of Book 1 he entitles the Viaticum. Now, the Viaticum is the Eucharist given to a dying person, so he's continuing on this theme. But of course, it's not just the person of Louis XV that he's talking about. It's that decay of French royalty. And it's quite a short chapter, but he's taking on similar sort of imagery as what we've seen in the previous chapter. And he closes it out with another call to the Bible, another one of these portents. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. This is what he says as he closes out. There is a pale grinning shadow of death, ceremoniously ushered along by another grinning shadow of etiquette. So we see there Ecclesiastes, Psalms. They're the biblical references there. Chapter 4 then, Louis the Unforgotten. Poor Louis, with these, it is a hollow phantasmagory, where like mimes they mope and mole, and utter false sounds for hire. But with thee it is frightful earnest. Frightful to all men is death, from old named king of terrors. So we're still, it's quite a protracted, long death that Carlyle opens with, and I think he's trying to show this sort of long. You don't get immediately the punch of a revolution. He has to show you the wither and the decay and the hollowing out that's going to come before that. And again, that reference there in chapter 4, King of Terrors, is another biblical reference. We see it in Job, for instance. So frightful to all men is death, from old named King of Terrors. Louis XV had always the kingliest abhorrence of death. Yes, poor Louis, death has found thee. No palace walls or lifeguards, gorgeous tapestries, or gilt buckram of stiffest ceremonial could keep him out. And he continues, sumptuous Versailles bursts asunder, like a dream, into void immensity. And here we see the decay gives way to the void. That same cloud-capped, fire-breathing scepter of democracy. Again, he talks about this specter. There's reminiscence here of even Marx, where he says the specter that's haunting Europe. Except for Carlyle, it's not just the specter of communism, it's the specter of democracy in the late 18th century. So it's a cloud-clapped, fire-breathing specter of democracy, incalculable, which is enveloping the world. So cataclysm awaits. And then finally, after painting the scene, he gets to his idea of, I am a historian at the end of the day, and I'm going to give you some dates. So he said, it is now the 10th of May, 1774. He will soon have done now. This is Louis, who will soon have passed away. And this is the style you're going to see with Carlyle. Set up the scene, really pull you into a narrative, and then he will just slap a date on it, just to drill the context in, and then forward with the narrative, and then slap a date on it, and then so on. This 10th of May day falls into loathsome sickbed. Dauphin, Dauphiness stand road ready, all grooms and equerries booted and spurred, waiting for some signal to escape the house of pestilence. Again, that idea of the house of pestilence, very biblical imagery. As one grudges to interfere with the beautiful theatrical candle which Madame Campan has lit on this occasion. Just the dim light, the decaying light, the withering body. You can almost smell the scene. Hail to your majesties, the Dauphin, Dauphiness, our king and queen. And then so immediately amid this, it's, the king is dead, long live the king. But when you've set it up in such a scene like this, it's more like, okay, you're going to be king over this decaying world. Enjoy that. Overpowered with many emotions, they two fall on their knees together. Immediately, first sign of kingship from Louis XVI is just to fall on his knees, not a sign of strength. And go with the streaming tears, exclaim, "O God, guide us, protect us, we are too young to reign." Too young indeed. Carlyle just chimes in. The new Louis with his court is rolling towards Choisy. Through the summer afternoon, the royal tears still flow. But a word mispronounced by Monsieur de Tartois sets them all laughing, and they weep no more. Light mortals, how you walk your life minuet over bottomless abysses, divided from you by a film. So we can see there's the immediate recognition. There's almost like a horror movie where there's the immediate recognition of Louis XVI. Oh my God, how am I going to rule this? Along with the Dauphiness, we are unprepared. And then sort of, oh no, it's false alarm. Someone has said something witty. We're having a laugh, and we'll forget about the seriousness of the situation. And again, just more biblical references. So that's book one. And the next one, we will look at the Paper Age. So Louis XV is dead, and next comes the Paper Age, which is, the equivalent of the late 18th century, the Twitterati. What are the prattering classes talking about now that this new king is on the scene?